And welcome everyone to the first ever episode of TJ Michaels Takes on the World. I am TJ Michaels, and this is where we talk about the things that matter. No sugarcoating, no political correctness, just real talk about God, family, country, and culture, and why. Because quite honestly, the world's a noisy place, and all kinds of different factions make all kinds of different noise. And sometimes you're thinking to yourself, "Am I the only one that thinks this way?" And well, you're not. In this show, we're diving deep into the issues that face our country, from the front lines of faith to the battles in the streets. We're going to tackle it all, whether you're at work tonight, hanging at home, or trying to find some sanity in this crazy world. You've kind of come to the right place. Now, I know this isn't your average podcast. I'm not your average host. I'm not here to coddle feelings or to avoid tough conversations. If you're tired of the same old spin and want to hear something different, something real, then buckle up because we're about to take on the world head first. Before we take on the world, let's start with the word. Around here, it's faith first. A new year and a new chapter bring renewed hope for our country. Today's verse comes from Jeremiah 29:11. For I know for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. May this verse guide us as we walk into this new era with faith in God's plan for America. And we begin tonight with our focus on the family. And the question is Disney finally figuring out that parents don't want their kids' cartoons served with a side of controversy? Or are they just reading the receipts and realizing that ticked off parents don't buy mouse ears? After years of, let's say, boldly shoving progressive content into their stories, content that often left parents throwing their hands in the air saying, "Really, Disney?" The House of Mouse seems to be hitting the brakes. And that specifically on a transgender themed storyline in their upcoming animated series, Win or Lose. Now, before you panic at what Pickles, the softball player, might be up to, he's the main character, here's the scoop. The character was initially written as a trans or, quote, sexually confused, according to the House of Mouse, middle schooler. Disney recently told the Hollywood Reporter that they've decided to rethink that plot line. And why? Well, because as their spokesperson put it, some parents probably would prefer to discuss sensitive topics like sexuality with their kids themselves. Imagine that. Parents who want to parent. Yeah, you mean Hollywood isn't the official spokesperson for all families? I know that shocks you, but yeah, that's true. Now, I'm not saying that Disney's completely seen the light, but it does seem as they've at least felt the heat. And when you mess with the thermostat of the American family, people start unsubscribing faster than you can say happiest place on earth. But it's not the first time Disney's gotten into hot water over these kinds of issues. You may remember back in 2022, the company waded into the deep end of Florida's parental rights education law. The bill basically said, hey, let's keep gender ideology out of kindergarten through third grade. Right? No brainer. Common sense. But critics and Disney spun it as the Don't Say Gay bill. And Disney decided to buy that spin, promote that spin. And that led to drama inside and outside of the company, all while their stock prices plummeted. So the same folks who used to pride themselves on being a family company, like back in old Walt's day, Walt Disney himself once said he aimed to uphold the highest moral and spiritual standards in his work. Can you imagine old Walt watching some of this modern stuff? I picture him muttering, "Jiminy Cricket, the hell happened to my dream?" Walt grew up in a little congregational church in Missouri, and he credited divine inspiration for his creativity. Fast forward to today, and his company's been producing content that would likely make him turn beet red and break into a song, probably something titled, "What Are You Thinking?" So, why the sudden shift on win or lose? Is it an epiphany about respecting parental rights? Maybe a light bulb moment where they realized, hey, parents really aren't too keen on lectures sandwiched in between scenes of singing teapots? Or is it just the cold hard reality of boycotts and sinking profit margins? I say likely it's probably a bit of both. But you know what? If it means fewer moral quandaries for Disney animators, we'll take it. Look, we can't assume Disney's going to pivot back to the days of family focused fairy tales overnight, but we can celebrate little victories. Today, a softball player named Pickles. Tomorrow, who knows? Maybe the House of Mouse will remember that families, not Hollywood, are the real MVPs of raising kids. Until then, we keep praying and watching and maybe canceling a subscription or two if they get it wrong again. Just calling it like we see it, with a spoonful of sugar to help the truth go down. On to country tonight. Early in the morning on New Year's Day, Americans were mostly sleeping, having run in a new year that was full of promise and hope. A new year with a new administration, a mandate, a promise to make America great again. And then about 3:15 a.m. on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter in New Orleans, evil reared its ugly head. And while tonight our America First segment should be focused on a more prosperous path for America, instead today we start with a sobering reminder that the threats we face and the choices we have to make to protect our way of life. The tragedy in New Orleans has shaken most of us to our core. In the early hours of New Year's Day, the bustling revelry on Bourbon Street turned into chaos when Shamsuddin Jabbar drove a truck flying an Islamic State flag into a crowd, killing and injuring dozens before engaging in a deadly shootout with police. The scene horrific. It was a stark and brutal reminder of the dangers we've allowed ourselves to overlook. For years, Americans believed that we could leave the Middle East and its geopolitical challenges behind. And when we withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, there was hope that we could turn our focus to other threats like communist China's ambition. But last year, the events of October 7th in Israel shattered that illusion. Israel's sense of security was upended, leading to a 15-month war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran, and that war still going today. Throughout this time, America has been a de facto participant in this conflict, and yet how many of us have truly paid attention to it? The Biden administration and much of the national press made sure it wasn't front page news. And now, with the horror on Bourbon Street and in Las Vegas, too, we can no longer afford to ignore the reality that whether they're created here or abroad, terrorists, Islamist terrorists, didn't quit. They were just biding their time. And it isn't a new tactic. Jabbar's actions are a chilling echo of the 2016 truck rampage in Nice, France, that claimed 86 lives, the Berlin Christmas market attack that killed 13, the Manhattan West Side attack in 2017 that left 8 dead. They're acts of barbarism that have occurred across the globe, from London to Spain to Canada, and now they've struck again on American soil. And so, what do we do? Well, our national response has been one of passivity, a dangerous complacency in the face of a implacable enemy. Brian Stewart wrote in a National Review earlier this year, warning us 2 months ago in his essay, "ISIS Plots Its Return." Stewart's words are more relevant today than ever. He writes, a policy of reduced responsibility in the face of an implacable enemy will narrow that margin of safety dramatically and perhaps even suddenly. America, the jihad never stopped targeting the U.S. It has simply waited for moments of weakness, and it's chosen this time. The sudden collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, the rise of the Sunni militants like Hayat Tahrir and Al Sham have created a new and vital landscape. And as Stewart noted, the governing class ought to consider how much more force will be required and in more adverse conditions, because if ISIS is permitted to reconstitute its statelet and begins to orchestrate a new campaign of terror around the globe, we're in big trouble. The jihad, it's back. The horror in New Orleans is not just an isolated tragedy, it's a wake up call. And we've got to confront the threat with resolve and strength. Our nation's policy should be, while not wanting to get into any other wars, our time for complacency is over. It's a time for America to put security, sovereignty, and the people back, and people first. So we will look to this new year with vigilance, but also with a sense of service and optimism, and putting America with all its ails back on track. And that's America First tonight. Finally, we want to take a look at the cultural compass tonight and take a spin around that. Big question this week: is woke on its way out? Now that on this January 6th, the 47th President of the United States, the votes have been counted and accepted, and Donald Trump is swaggering back onto the world stage. Is America about to experience a seismic shift in culture, or are we just about to see another sequel that no one asked for? Well, grab your red hats. Things are about to get interesting. But we got to rewind the clock just a little bit and go back about 15 years ago. Political correctness went from a quiet whisper to a loud woke shriek. Suddenly, all it took to get yourself dragged through the woke institution was, I don't know, making a joke, wearing a red hat, even waving an American flag would do it. You didn't even actually have to say something offensive, just be perceived as offensive, and that was enough to land you on the wrong side of history. Forget your Miranda rights. Rahm Emanuel was right when he said, when the woke police come at you, you don't even get your Miranda rights read, do you? I mean, forget your rights. They're too busy canceling you before you can even finish the sentence. But hold on to your hats. Literally, after Trump's win, those famous red MAGA hats, well, they started popping up in places like Manhattan, started popping up in Beverly Hills, started popping up on Rodeo Drive, like they were the hottest new fashion trend. The most polarizing fashion statement of the decade, quote, of the Washington Post. And honestly, at this point, red hats are more iconic than most celebrity endorsements. Turns out some people in these liberal enclaves were feeling emboldened enough to wear their beliefs on their head, like a walking billboard for freedom of speech. And then in Beverly Hills, in Los Angeles, a Times reporter named Noah Goldberg did a story and posted a picture of 6 young women at a high school rally in Beverly Hills wearing MAGA hats. And the caption read, "This wouldn't have happened 8 years ago." Well, he was right. Because back then, wearing a red hat in Beverly Hills probably meant you were a character in Real Housewives, not a political statement. But listen, we're not renaming Rodeo Drive just yet, although MAGA Boulevard has a nice ring to it. Something is happening. Cracks are forming in the woke culture, like a bad foundation on a house you paid too much for. Trump managed to turn the culture war into his own personal WWE match. And he didn't just tip his toes into the waters of political correctness. Now he body slammed it. He gave it a nickname. He posted on a Truth Social at 3 a.m. about it. And was he subtle? No. Did he need to be? Also, no. You see, for years, regular folks like you and me, terrified of the cultural enforcers. Step out of line and you might lose your job. You might get canceled. You might wind up on some moral tribunal. But Trump, listen, whether you love him or hate him, didn't exactly bend to the will of the woke mob. In fact, when the woke police came after him, he pretty much said, "Bring it." And you know what? He survived. He came out swinging. And to a lot of people, that's what made him their hero. See, the message is you don't have to apologize to the outrage mob for saying things that no reasonable person would find offensive. That's just the kind of permission a lot of Americans were waiting for. So now, with Trump potentially heading back to the White House, is a cultural shift really on the horizon? Well, you're going to have to judge for yourself. I believe that a massive cultural shift has happened. But this much is for sure: Americans are sick and tired of walking on eggshells. They're tired of being scared to speak their minds for fear of getting canceled by some woke warrior with a keyboard. There is no question that Americans have rejected biological women, biological men, in women's sports, sex change operations for middle school kids. Companies that are companies are now canceling their DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, slashing their budgets. And wokeism appears to be flat on the canvas with really no safe space within sight. So Trump's return could give the woke culture a little bit of a punch. And, even if Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough, those folks who've been calling him a fascist for years are making peace with him now at Mar-a-Lago, that tells you something is definitely up. And while it does feel like a mammoth cultural shift and a mandate from the people, Never underestimate the radical left in this country. Don't get too comfortable because woke culture is like that bad sequel that just won't die. Trump's not going to be able to single handedly send it packing, but he's already done something crucial, important, and something that the American people love him for. He's given Americans the permission to stop fearing it. And for many, that's a win because the air on this January 6th feels a little less suffocating now. So buckle up. Whether we're seeing the end of woke or just the beginning of another round of culture wars, one thing's for sure, things are getting interested. It's a short podcast. That's going to wrap our very first episode of TJ Michaels Takes on the World. We did cover a lot, though, in a very short time, from God, family, country, to the issues that matter to you. And let's be honest, I probably stirred up some feelings, which is exactly what happens when you have tough conversations. And this show is all about bringing truth, honesty, and maybe a little bit of common sense back into the conversation. So I want to thank you for joining me on this wild ride, whether you agree with everything I said or you're out there shaking your head. I do want to hear from you. The discussion is just getting started, and I'm already ready to take on whatever's next, one episode at a time. So keep your faith strong, keep your family close, and never stop fighting for this country that we call home. Until next time, keep your eye on the horizon because we're just getting started taking on the world. Good night.